And then great. Thanks, Ty. So I will call this special meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission of Thursday, June 15, 2023 to order at 7:01. Roll call is actually, before I get to roll call, I'm going to read the meeting minutes. I'm going to read the instructions. So this is a special meeting. It's a public meeting, which will be audio and video recorded, just like every other Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. There's no applicants, but if there is comment from the public, which I think we can accept tonight, so that we can understand what the feelings are. Maybe the people who wrote letters can clarify if necessary. But we'll ask that if you're speaking, members of the public and commissioners, that you put your video on and certainly your sound on and identify yourselves. But other than that, the default rule will be for this meeting that everyone will remain on mute, and commissioners and staff will generally remain on mute, except when speaking or voting, and will generally keep video of themselves on. Applicants and members can feel free to leave their video on or off. However, they'll be asked to turn their video on when speaking. Again, please state your name. And when you are speaking, let's be respectful and seek first to understand and then be understood. Listen carefully and don't interrupt. Stay on topic and speak for yourselves and not for others. And please remember it's okay to disagree. But this is as a discussion and not a debate, and avoid making assumptions, especially about the intentions of others. Okay, so then the roll call continues to be myself and Karen and Shelby and Chris and Anthony. And that constitutes a quorum. And just in case we're going to make any decisions or motions tonight, I'll elevate Shelby and Anthony to voting status.
Yes, I think Shelby is already a regular member. It's Anthony and Chris that are the alternates.
Thanks, Ty. Yes, sorry, Shelby. So Anthony and Chris, you guys are in, and Shelby's in her regular seat. Then the business of the day is reviewing the proposed zoning regulations amendments, accessory dwelling units and conservation development. And I think that I would like to turn this over to Glenn to sort of manage.
Great.
So I'll do that now.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Just as a quick update in terms of where we are in the process, we started off at the end of last year in terms of identifying some regulation changes we wanted. We worked through most of those following the public informational meeting in April, and the commission has scheduled a number of those regulations for public hearing in July, where we might move ahead and act on those particular issues. There were two outstanding issues the commission requested that we spend a little bit more time on. Both of those are on the agenda tonight. The first of which is a discussion about accessory dwelling units. So I'll bring that up first. And then in the meeting later, we'll talk about conservation development approach. So following the last meeting, I've done some additional work here for the commission's consideration. I'll just kind of walk through here. The issues are related to permitting accessory dwelling units in the village residential and the rural residential districts. And the language that is in the use sections indicates that if they're in accordance with section 6200. Section 6200 is the section that's going to contain all the provisions related to accessory dwelling units. This table gets a little bit complicated because there are multiple situations that apply, but the basic idea in the village residential zones, when it's accessory to a single family dwelling, you can have your first ADU within or attached to the building by zoning permit. If it's detached, it's a special permit. And then there's a potential for a second ADU, provided a unit is deed restricted. And I think that's where we'll spend most of our time talking here tonight. This essentially is the equivalent of the potential of 3 dwelling units on a property. So the commission has also discussed enabling an accessory dwelling unit accessory to a 2-family, which is really the same thing. And that again would be special permit. And in these cases, also a detached guest house is already permitted in the regulations, and that would be permitted in lieu of an accessory dwelling unit, but not in addition thereto. The same kind of situation exists in the RU1 district. Within or attached to the principal building, and an accessory dwelling unit is allowed by zoning permit. If it's detached, it's a special permit, and you can have a detached guest house in lieu of a detached ADU. So that's the basic foundation. The Birch Hill area, special zoning district, 1 ADU accessory to a single family dwelling within or attached. And if you have a single family dwelling in either the village commercial or the village hamlet, same situations apply. So the regulations, in a sense, are now laid out here. You have to have sanitary arrangements approved by the sanitarian or the sewer commission, water supply approved by the health department. Application submitted, accompanied by a notarized letter from the owner stating that he, she, or they will occupy one of the dwelling units on the premises or reserve it for their personal use. In other words, if somebody's second home, they keep the principal building or the principal building for their use. They can lease out an accessory dwelling unit. If the owner does not reside on the premises, that now becomes a zoning violation. Added language here stating that neither the principal dwelling or the accessory dwelling unit should be used for short-term rental occupancy, such as an Airbnb. If it's a long-term rental occupancy, more than 30 days, that could be permissible for one of the units. But again, it has to be owner occupied. Adequate parking needs to be provided. The accessory dwelling unit, which is internal or attached, separate egress, operable door. Some additional requirements in terms of units, and some additional provisions related to a detached accessory unit. I think the issue that we were struggling with a little bit our last meeting was the concept of deed restricting the unit. How long should it be deed restricted for? So I did some research in terms of some other communities in the state. A highlighted text here in our last edition said 10 years, which is the statutory minimum. There are some towns that require 40 years. This is highlighted in here. It's just a number for discussion tonight as to what we think might be an appropriate standard. I've offered for your consideration that the income is 80% of the median income for Litchfield County. Some communities went as low as 60%, but I think 80% is an important number. And I think that I would recommend this for the commission's consideration. These units will count towards the town's affordable housing listing, the number of affordable units. Ty and I were talking through a little bit as to how we might be able to verify the occupants being eligible in terms of the income guidelines and the rental rate or sale price being appropriately calculated. The Kent Affordable Housing Inc., that was the correct name, has indicated that they might be prepared to do this. And rather than only list them, I also added language that or other qualified, capable, and experienced entity acceptable to the commission. Talked with Jocelyn, and there are entities that provide services such as this in the region. But I think KAH is an excellent organization with experience reviewing income, qualifying households, and looking at the appropriate rental rates. The number 10 here is one where we suggest that an annual report should be submitted to verify occupancy. I think there are some comments and questions about that particular provision. But the idea again would be that if the occupancy changes of the unit, we would catch up and realize that a unit was being occupied by an ineligible household or something else was going on, and that we could try to stay ahead of that particular issue. I also found a deed restriction in another community, which I adapted for possible use in Kent. I don't know that the commission needs to include this as part of the regulation, but it might be something that you could facilitate with others. A basic provision that highlights the requirements of the regulations in terms of owner occupancy, rental rate and restriction term, et cetera. So that's, I think, where the regulation is at. Part of the challenge we faced last time was the idea about income verification, et cetera. And I think Kent Affordable Housing has indicated this might be something that they would be prepared to do. So I think if the commission can give some feedback on some of these provisions here, questions or comments that they may have, we might be in a position to move forward. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Matt, or open it up for comments from the commission members.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I think I think now it would be appropriate if anybody on the commission had any comments to what Glenn's put together.
I have one comment. I think, let's see, 6200, section 6D. I think it should be not B in section D.
Oh, D.
So it said the unit shall be located in a basement.
Oh, good for you. Nice catch, Anthony. Thank you.
So- Great.
I just want to point out from what Anthony has said, it does provide some relief in this type of situation unless otherwise approved by the commission through granting of a special permit. So any of these provisions, if it's a challenge to the creation of the unit, the commission could consider a modification to that. But Anthony's right. This should not be located in a basement unless that basement constitutes a walkout basement. And I think that's the appropriate language there. So again, thank you, Anthony, for that.
You're welcome.
I have a question about the difference between the guest house, use of a guest house and an ADU. I don't have the definitions of the two in front of me. Could an owner just lease out a guest house as an owner would lease out an ADU without the limitations that this proposed amendments contemplate?
So in Kent's regulations, a guest house doesn't contain a kitchen. So it might be a
Okay.
situation that somebody might have a little cottage on their property. They may have guests come to visit. They might sleep there, would have bathroom facilities, but the cooking facilities would be shared with the house. So it's considered not really a dwelling unit. Could somebody lease it out? Yes, they could. But it doesn't come with a kitchen. So at least under the zoning definitions, it wouldn't be considered a dwelling unit in the way that an accessory dwelling unit would be, because that does contain the complete gamut of living, sleeping, cooking, bathing, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Karen or Chris?
I had a question, I thought, about the short-term rentals not being allowed, but I've reread this section number 4, and I think I'm okay with it. I was just going to question why that was, but if it's because it's an affordable dwelling, I think I understand.
But I think that's a good point, Karen, that we're talking about 6,200. And neither the principal dwelling or any accessory dwelling enabled by this regulation. So this regulation of 6,200, which is accessory dwelling units. So it seems as if we're saying that an accessory dwelling unit, whether it's the first ADU or the second ADU, whether it's designated as affordable housing or not, may not be leased for short-term rentals.
Okay, so then I am concerned, because I think that could potentially be taking away an opportunity for owners. And quite frankly, the way the world works right now, at least, especially after COVID, there's a number of people who do these short-term rentals. And, you know, I would hate to see that be prohibited.
Yeah, I think, well, I think that this 6,200, that's the right number, right? 6,204 could be narrowed to, although I'm not sure that it's necessary, it could be narrowed to simply say that the dwelling that's deed restricted can't be rented short-term. I'm not sure that you ever would rent a deed restricted, because there's other sections in this particular regulation that says that it has to be rented for a year, doesn't it? Is it in the same one? Yeah, it's in this same number
Yes.
4. So I think that's a good catch, Karen.
Though I think there is a lot of issue in the community about more and more communities are restricting short-term rentals on account of the negative impacts, the transient population. Maybe I'm thinking about, the city noise and trash and that sort of thing. And they've been challenged in courts around the country. And courts have been deferring to municipalities under the police powers if they think that the negative consequences of short-term rentals are established or real. If the legislation regulation is carefully drafted, then they've been upheld. Airbnb is just launched a lawsuit against New York City because of the regulations on Airbnb in New York City, claiming that they're very onerous. And they do raise issues about, as Karen suggested, rights of owners to do whatever they choose to do, but that right is not unlimited. So I'm thinking it might be advisable to discuss the values and the negative consequences of short-term rentals as a general proposition.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, I understand that. I've heard that actually from a few other zoning enforcement officers in the area. But to my knowledge, and maybe Donna and Ty could clarify, I don't know of any regulation or state statute that prohibits it right now. I know there's a whole idea that these things take away from people being able to rent more long-term, but I think that this ability to rent for however long you wish as a seller should not be limited. I think it should be, I don't want to say God-given, but a right of ownership. And I think if you're going to limit it, I think Matt's point is probably spot on, to just limit it to the affordable housing units.
Yeah, so
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I'm glad you're having this conversation because I think it's a really gray area right now in our regulations. Currently, my understanding, the commission's position was that you generally don't allow them because the regulations don't speak to them currently, and anything that the regulations do not, you have a clause in your regulations that say anything that's not specifically permitted is considered not allowed. However, I think the direction of the commission has always been not to enforce. However, there's been certain situations that have come up where people would like to convert their bed and breakfast because they can't necessarily own or occupy it back into a single family so that they can Airbnb instead. So it's a great thing that you guys are having this or starting this conversation. And also I was kind of curious, by mentioning it in this part of the regulation, will that kind of trigger that clause that's in there that says if you don't mention it, then it's not allowed? Now you've mentioned it, so now does this all of a sudden mean that it is allowed otherwise? So I'd love to hear, your thoughts on it and, what direction you guys want to go overall.
There may be time for a bigger conversation about short-term rentals. And this is a fairly fast-moving area in terms of public policy and the law, as Shelby indicated. So I think picking up on what Karen and Matt have said here, my thought for your consideration right now is only in this section to get rid of the text I've highlighted here. So that this section would now say, no affordable dwelling unit, and I think we add in there, enabled by this regulation shall be used for rental occupancy. So in other words, we're not regulating anybody else. All we're saying here is that if you go through this process to create an affordable dwelling unit, you can't then go use that for an Airbnb. That absolutely is not what we're trying to create by the enabling of a second dwelling unit. I think that as Ty points out, the enforcement of this is a big challenge. The state tried to tackle this a couple of years ago with legislation which would have required owners desiring to do Airbnb to register with the State Department of Revenue Services, get a separate taxpayer ID number. That was going to have a chilling effect on a lot of this stuff, but it never actually got through to completion. So I know that there has been discussion on this in many municipalities, and I think everybody's kind of tackling this one on their own. There are shoreline communities that believe big in Airbnb because that's the way, you know, they make summer rental income from the beach. And there's other places that think it's the worst thing that ever happened to a community because, you know, some places have found party houses. But I think what we can do, as Karen points out, Matt kind of seconded, is to pick up on this and simply say that no affordable dwelling unit created by this regulation shall be used that way. And I think we now respect property rights better, and we encourage the provision of the affordable units that was our original intent.
And I think that's right. And I definitely respect Ty's desire to have some clear parameters within which to work. So I think that should go on the sort of the secondary list. I don't want to call it the long-term list, but the midterm list of things that we should be talking about. Ty, did you start to say something and I cut you off?
The only thing I was just gonna ask Glenn was, so the idea of being silent on a topic, in, you know how the clause in the regulations where it says it's not, if it's not spoken to, then it's not allowed. The fact that you've now spoken to it, does it make it allowed everywhere else? Like by pointing out that it's not permitted in this one area, does that all of a sudden say that that was the only chosen area that you didn't permit it and everywhere else now it is permitted?
You know, that's enough of a legal question, Ty. I'm going to duck that one. I don't think that this opens that Pandora's box, but in the back of my mind, I'm recalling a conversation I had about a court case, which not too long ago, I'd say in the last year or so, that kind of mirrors what Karen was saying, that there are property rights that you have, and you retain that bundle of property rights unless, as Shelby pointed out, through the police power, it's specifically limited in some way, shape, or form. And I think this case said something about if Airbnb wasn't specifically listed or short-term rentals, then it was a property right that came with it. So I think it's enough of a delicate issue. I would urge you to ask that question of Mike. And I think that if the commission is comfortable with this and we're going to send this along, for example, to public hearing or whatever, I would say we're gonna want to have Mike look at this specifically to make sure we're not stepping in something we certainly didn't intend to step into.
Great, thanks, Glenn. So for right now, I think we're somewhat in general consensus that Glenn is going to modify this text to simply begin with no at the end of that second line.
Yep.
Okay. Great. So I have a couple of questions regarding 3 and 4 on the previous page. And it's really just a throwaway comment. Is in both of 3 and 4, there's an enforcement aspect here that I'm wondering how it gets affected. You know, subject to all enforcement penalties available under the law.
So I think Ty and I had this conversation before. I think it's been my experience over the years that zoning is a wonderful tool when somebody needs a permit to start something. Zoning isn't such a wonderful tool if somebody's doing something and you want to try to stop them from doing it. You need clear language, you need an enforcement process, and eventually you may end up having to go to court for cease and desist or other things like that. And it's unfortunate. Ty and I had a conversation that the town has been contemplating enforcement ordinance related to different land use matters. So I think that that could tie into this. The enforcement penalties available under the law, I think it's 8-12 or 8-13. They're not awesome. So this gets to be a bit of a challenge. So this is, tough language and perhaps sounds tougher than what we're really able to do expeditiously. But I think that, we have to say to people that, if you're going to buy a property, put in a accessory dwelling unit and lease both of them out for Airbnb. That's not what we're trying to do here. This specific intention is to try to create living opportunities for people in an owner-occupied dwelling. The owner helps manage the occupancy of the accessory dwelling unit. It's not kind of an unattended. If the commission wanted to enable two-family dwellings, as they have in the VR zones, you could do that anyway. So I think these are delicate issues, Matt.
Okay. All right, I understand that, and that's, I accept that response. So with regard then to number 8 on the next page, I would be in favor of, in the highlighted section, a period of not less than 10 years. But that term shall automatically renew for successive 10-year periods unless an alternate plan is accepted by the commission. That seems to make sense to me. 30 years is, I know there's some written comment that 30 years was maybe excessive. But I really do like the idea of an automatic renewal unless the property owner comes to the commission and says, listen, it's been 10 years and the situation has changed and this is what we'd like to do, and let the commission ruminate and decide.
I think Justin came up with that language, and thanks to Justin, I think that's a great solution. It's language I'm very comfortable with, and I'm happy to put that in.
Great. And then the other question I have regarding also regarding comments that were written, written communication, the median income.
Yep.
So right now we're basing this eligibility on families are paying 30% of income that's less than or equal to 80%. And so the concern was that as young people or as people become more successful and they're pulling themselves out of the eligibility for affordable housing, that might be excluded from eligibility. So my question is, how quickly is this median income growing, and is it growing at a pace that would elevate those lesser income people and keep them eligible? Does that make any sense?
So HUD updates the information annually. And so there's published information out there for Litchfield County, for other what they call housing market finance areas in Connecticut. And that's what the math is based on. So I think it's April of every year they update this. So it should be a simple lookup. If you put in, Connecticut median income or county median in Litchfield County, you'll get to the web address for HUD user, it's called, and find the income limits there. I've been after the State Department of Housing to publish it on their website, so we don't have to go looking at it on the federal one, and they claim they don't have the staff to do it. So I hope it will become simpler over time. But Jocelyn and everybody else can quickly get you the number. And I think Justin and Ken Affordable Housing uses this data on a regular basis, so they would also have the most recent information.
So the concern may be that that a young family, if we're looking at this, or if we're requiring an annual review, are going to, age out or income out of this eligibility. Should we be concerned about that and change the regulation, the language?
I think this is a policy decision on the part of the commission. I think really what you're and Justin are talking about here is section 10. And this relates to annual reporting. So the concept here was that maybe every April or every January or something else like that, there would be a verification that the person in occupancy is in fact somebody who was qualified a year ago to occupy the unit, update, verify their income, the rental rate that they're paying, make sure everybody still applies, everything still applies, so that it is an affordable unit going to a needy household. I think Justin brought up a good point that, we've got people who are living in a unit, and what are you going to do? You're going to kick them out. You throw them to the wolves in a sense, because there's not a lot of other housing. So, the issue perhaps could be that we don't go through the annual reporting thing. We get an eligible household into the unit. Maybe we verify that the rental rate is acceptable, but nobody's going to get kicked out. So if somebody earns more and more money, you'd like that unit to be available to perhaps a more needy household, but maybe we're not going to get involved in sort of kicking people out. I'm not sure. So I think this is an area ripe for discussion and conversation.
I see that as being a enforcement issue also. We would have to, so say you have multiple units like this throughout the town, then we have to have someone enforcing this, checking on this every year, making sure that if we put that regulation in place, that Ty has to go and check this every year, add that to her plate, or Donna, or
No, that's why I tried to, Chris, get it to Ken Affordable Housing. In other words, it could be a simple matter of a couple of emails or phone calls with verification, or, somebody comes down to town hall and, swears in front of the town clerk type of thing, or whatever. And the basic threat was, if people don't respond, the idea was going to be, well, then I'm sorry, but that year gets added on now.
Hmm.
And so the issue is there's a strong incentive for people to answer, because now the 10-year situation or the 30-year, whatever, was going to be extended. I think based on Matt's language, we're going to go 10 years with 10-year automatic renewals. So this is hard to extend that term, because it's already going to be extended at the end of 10 anyway. So this can be a challenge. I think the risk that we run, we're providing an opportunity here to create housing for people. We hope it's going to be affordable and meet housing needs, both for the property owner, but also in terms of the tenants. And it's really the commission's call here in terms of the whole enforcement thing as to, how we're going to manage that. So.
Karen, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I just have a question. I don't know the answer. Virginia does, I'm sure. When someone applies and is granted, the ability to do an affordable rental, or that's what it would be. Do they not sign a contract? Do they not sign an agreement that would, indicate to them from the very beginning that this would be a requirement?
Yeah, so there's a deed restriction gets filed on the land records.
Yeah.
And there's language on page 5 of the materials here that says, okay.
I must have
And
missed it, sorry.
No, it's okay. This is they're required to state that, yes, they're going to occupy the unit. Yes, it's going to be rented. When it's required to be deed restricted, it's going to be rented at an affordable price to an eligible household. And then hopefully it is. What happens 3 or 5 years from now? Does that slip? It's still going to be an accessory dwelling unit. We're not dealing with large, significant houses, generally speaking. So it's going to be more affordable than other housing options.
I see it now. Thank you, Glenn. I see it on the possible deed restriction document. I
thank
didn't
you.
catch that. It's in number 3. Thanks.
So why, I think that's a relatively good segue into Virginia's raised hand. So Virginia, just quickly, is something you want to add?
I'd just like to offer two factual inserts here. One is that the present people in affordable housing have their income checked every year, and it goes on regularly, and that seems to me no problem at all. The other thing is that the area median income for Litchfield County is somewhere between $90,000 and $100,000. When somebody's making $100,000, they are unlikely to prefer living in a small accessory building controlled by affordable housing regulations, and are likely to move up. And I don't see that it's a great pain to make them do so. That's all. Just
Thank you, Virginia.
So let me follow. I'm sorry, who's sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, I just didn't see who was speaking. I didn't want to be speaking over everyone. I just want to ask Virginia 2 questions. So you said that the annual review is something that's done sort of as business as usual. Do you see, or in your experience, are the people who sort of age out of that, who to income out of that eligibility?
I am not absolutely positive that eviction is impossible at that point. I have long held the confidence that eviction never happens for too much money. But I couldn't swear to that. You'd have to go to either the management or the state for the definitive answer on that. It doesn't happen a lot, I am sure.
Okay.
If possible, I'd like to chime in here.
Yeah, sure, Justin. I was just getting
So
ready.
right now at South Common, we're dealing with a situation where we have a resident who moved in, shortly after the real COVID pandemic, who apparently is now sort of in a situation where their income is such that they are in a tricky situation with regards to the income qualifications.
What is the percentage on that unit?
It's a 60%. South Common is 25 to 60%. So
25 or 60 makes a big difference.
So
I mean,
it's a 60%
if we
unit.
say the area median income is $100,000, 25% is $25,000.
So, but it's a fundamental sort of demographic issue where it's so many of these small towns where we're interested in retaining young adults who are sort of moving up in their careers and whatnot. And if they get a foothold in affordable housing, then if they are income qualified every year, then at some point in time, if they are moving along in their careers and they're getting married, they get a fiance and whatnot, they are going to qualify out of affordable housing. And there is a great gap at the moment between the cost of affordable housing and a single family home in Kent.
Just a couple of things. Justin, thank you, by the way, you and Virginia both, for your comments and assistance. You're helping us a great deal in terms of evaluating this. I realize that I think what I want to do is this concept here in 9B about state calculations. The applicable rental rate and eligible income rate varies by the size of the unit. If it's a studio, a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom, then the household size is bigger and the income is bigger. So I think that we can, I just want to add some language in here that says something like calculations for the size of the unit. And I think that now, Justin, I think I see you nodding. So, you have some experience with this. And again, people will sort of get that quickly. I'm very sensitive to the concept that people, you know, now would earn out, if you will, of eligibility for this. But it's quite possible, we're talking about a property that's got 3 units on it, a principal, a regular affordable, and a deed restricted affordable. So the issue is if somebody income qualifies out, there might still be the other affordable unit or accessory unit on the property that they could transition to stay there. And then the other unit could become the affordable unit. The requirement is that one of the units be affordable. And so it could be a tricky management issue that doesn't fall to the commission or hopefully to Kent Affordable Housing, but it might be a situation that people would actually have options on the property, and maybe they stay in their unit and the other unit becomes the deed restricted affordable. So I don't know.
We dream of options.
Good, Justin.
That is part of our mission, housing options. But the fact of the matter is, right now in Kent, you have this huge gulf between the affordable units and the market rate units, and we have situations where especially young adults sort of they fall into that gap there between the dedicated affordable and the market rate units. So.
Justin, do you see any possible issue of people, forget what the term would be, but they've earned out of the income eligibility. They're squatting. They're squatting in a unit. They're earning more. They're actually holding that unit from others. I think that's the challenge, if you will, for the commission is we do want to provide housing, but we're stung between the people who are eligible 7 years ago but are still occupying versus people who need that unit today. So
that is a incredibly important philosophical issue, especially in the New York City context, where you have rent regulation that is not means tested ever, where you have folks making 6 figures and then some who are occupying rent stabilized apartments, but we are a long ways away from that in the town of Kent. Especially given that people need to be income qualified to move into these units. It's not some young lawyer who's moving into these units. So,
Justin, how would you feel about a requirement to not necessarily income qualify people, but to check that the rental rate is consistent with the state calculations each year?
That makes a lot of sense. So, to me, it'd be extremely easy for Kent Affordable Housing to every year, if you have a rent restricted unit, to provide the landlord with what the current rent is. So, but we just don't want to get to the situation that Kent Affordable Housing is right now, where we have someone who qualified a year or two ago, sort of suddenly faced up against this bureaucracy that frankly Kent Affordable Housing does not, we just administer it. We don't dictate it, where they say you need to be making this much, and it's great for if you are an older person on a fixed income, that provides you stability going forward, and you don't have to worry about it. But if you are a young person, a teacher, a firefighter, someone whose income is stepping up every year, it puts you sort of into a bind, and it's sort of the result when it's means tested every year is that it runs counter to, I think, what the objectives of providing affordable housing is. But, and a key part of that is housing stability.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I'm in agreement with all of that, because if we're just rent checking, then we're penalizing the property owner for having this deed restriction, but we're not ensuring. And when I say we, I mean I did very loosely. There's no assurance that it's the families who need it who are getting the benefit of those lower rents. So I'd say as you said, Justin, it's a philosophical discussion, but we're trying to provide a pathway for people who are less fortunate financially to afford housing, and then when they become more fortunate, then maybe they should be willing to pay it forward and move on to something else, and let somebody else who was in their position 5 or 6 years ago have the benefit of that stabilized rent.
What 100%, Matt. I'm in complete agreement with you. But Kent Affordable Housing is going to be required to verify incomes year after year. So we'll be we'll be having the difficult discussions with folks from time to time, and it's it's really it's a philosophical question for the commission as to whether you want to do that. It's sort of philosophical question.
That's right. And it's easy for me to have it. Yes.
I will put myself on mute now.
All right. And Virginia, I'll call on you again, and then we can sort of wrap this up and move on to the next topic.
Without being philosophical, this limit of 30% of income gives you a little bit of wiggle room, because if a person's income is 30,000 a year, no, if it's 100,000 a year and then the housing costs are 30, if it goes to 150, then their housing costs go to 45,000 a year. And so that if maybe Glenn, who is good at this sort of thing, can find a way of linking a rent rise with an income rise on the basis of the 30%. I can't do it off the top of my head, but maybe that's the way to make sure that nobody gets a free ride.
Okay, thanks, Virginia, and thanks, Justin, for jumping in. You guys are our resident gurus, and it's nice to have your thoughts. Glenn, do you have enough information now to decide where we want to go with this and maybe describe the next steps for the commission?
Well, I think there's perhaps two ways to go from here. I think I can certainly incorporate the decisions that the commission has made this evening. This issue related to number 10, I don't think we have complete closure on that one. We could get back together again and talk about it next month, or we could take a stab at something and we head for public hearing and modify it as we go. So again, maybe as Justin called it, a philosophical decision on the part of the commission as to how tightly we want to nail this down versus sort of, moving ahead. I think we're close on these issues, with the exception of the earning out. Virginia just sort of made an observation that, if somebody goes over the income threshold, then the issue is, yeah, you should be paying more income, but maybe paying more rent. I don't know where it goes. Maybe it goes to a housing trust fund at the town or something, so that they're not getting a free ride anymore. The homeowner's not receiving the money either, type of thing. So I'd like to put some thought into this. Is the commission inclined to sort of move this down the road, head to public hearing, maybe, in the fall, or you want to see it again? What would you like to do?
I'm somewhat in favor of leaving 10 the way it is, making the couple of changes that we made, and then going to public hearing and maybe modifying per those discussions.
I think, Matt, based on the change that we made up above in 8, which said automatic renewal, I think this paragraph in 10 comes out.
I agree.
So I think, I didn't want you to think there wasn't going to be any changes to 10. It's just that paragraph really no longer applies.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you're right. That
Okay.
second paragraph definitely comes out, and if that comes out, then the up in 8 after the highlighted section in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th line after 30 years,
Yeah.
in parentheses, that has to come out too.
Thank you very much. The other thing that occurs to me, I think I'd like to suggest for the commission's consideration, since HUD trying to give the benefit of the doubt to a tenant that may be in this situation. In number 10, we talk about generally in January of each year. That's not a good month. If in April, the HUD revised income information is going to become available and people will file their taxes in April, right? So now we have last year's taxes versus this year's income. That's about as much flexibility as we can actually give on this. Run the math on the new numbers based on last year's income. So we're giving people a little wiggle room on that. So I'd like to change that to April.
Okay.
All right.
Would it be interrupting if I ask whether we're still talking about 30 years or 10 years?
I think what the decision was, Virginia, that my notes indicate in number 8, we're changing this to 10 years, automatically renewable at the end of 10 years, unless the owner and the commission come to a separate understanding.
Excellent.
And then any other discussion or comment points from the balance of the commission? Everybody seems comfortable with moving forward. And I think what we're talking about is going to public hearing, and it would be in the August meeting, right? In order to give everybody enough time for the notification and everything. Ty, that's okay with you?
Yep, that's correct. August 10th would probably be the best case scenario. I think that's the August meeting date.
So then I would, maybe suggest a motion to the effect that that we would move this accessory dwelling unit, the changes to the accessory dwelling unit regulation, encompassing the comments I've made tonight, to a public hearing at the next available regular meeting.
So moved.
And a second.
Seconded.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Thanks, Anthony. Any further discussion? And seeing none, then yes, I'll call the vote. So all those in favor, so signify by raising your hand and or saying aye. And that is the 5 of us. Okay, thanks, everybody. That motion carries. Thank Glenn for that, for the guidance.
Well, and thank you to the commission for the feedback, and for Virginia and Justin for their careful reading and helpful suggestions. So I think it's a team effort. So thank you for that.
Okay, conservation subdivision then, right?
There we go. So we had, I prepared this information for the commission's meeting last month. I apologize. This actually has the May 8th date on it. I didn't change the date. The only change from the May 8th version is I did get some feedback from Denise Lord, the town engineer, and Rick Osborne from the highway department with regard to some road standards. So that's really the only thing. I think the meat of the matter, if you will, is in the regulation sections. You may recall from our conversation last month that we had kind of a funny situation. We had a provision for conservation development in the RU1 district, and we had an overlay zone that contained the standards related to that. Property owner came along and wanted to pursue a conservation type development in the village residential district, inserted some language, and then crafted a new section of the regulation. So we actually ended up with sort of conservation development in 4 places in the regulations. And trying to manage that got to be kind of crazy as I was trying to implement the feedback the commission had given me. And it just occurred to me, why are we doing this? Why don't we just merge them together? So many of the provisions are identical and we can separate between them. So that's what I've attempted to do here for the commission's consideration. I think there's a number of regulation changes that we need to kind of spend a little bit of time talking about. And that's what I wanted to work through with you this evening is get the commission's acceptance, if you will, of the merged provision that we can modify and tweak and make differences between the VR districts and the RU1 district. But I think also to kind of set the stage for this. So I think just really quick here on the first page, in the use table, it's going to say conservation developments. We're going to use section 6780 to indicate that that's the standard, if you will. And then in the village residential zone, it's permitted by special permit. In the rural residential district, it's required as part of subdivision approval. So this is the situation we had recently in our discussion on Carter Road. It didn't meet the threshold there for 20 acres or more or 5 lots or more, so it wasn't required. But for other subdivisions in the RU1 district, the basic direction we would like for people to go in is a conservation development, because it maximizes the protection of natural resources, preservation of open space, et cetera. As a result of all of that, if the commission goes this route, we had created a special zoning district 5200, which was the conservation development overlay. We're not going to need that because we're going to be sending everybody to section 6700. So this now becomes reserved for future use, and that text all comes out. I think the next section overall for the conservation development, and again, this is in both districts, the purpose and intent has been merged to reflect that, we want to preserve open space, farmland, community character, encourage variation in residential development, flexible site design, and be sensitive to parcel configuration, topography, and other things. So to accomplish these purposes, conservation development can be required in the RU1 district and may be allowed in the VR districts. And a pre-application review is strongly encouraged. In terms of the overall design of the development, we got rid of the original provisions in the regulations related to what we had called primary and secondary conservation areas. You may recall, as part of our discussion on the plan of conservation and development, that that distinction wasn't widely favored. So as a result, those important resources have all been merged here as areas to be considered and evaluated and protected to the extent possible as part of a new development approach. And these resources are intended to guide the location of open space areas and the designation of conservation areas, et cetera. So it's meant to be an ecologically and environmentally sensitive design that would come to the commission. I think section here 6730 is perhaps the one that we want to spend some time discussing here tonight. The question is the preservation of open space. At the present time, as crafted and adopted by the commission, the open space requirement is 50% in the RU1 district, and the commission adopted the regulation changes proposed, which was for 40% in the VR1 and VR2 district. Given the commission's concern about whether the preservation of open space was just unusable land, such as wetlands, water courses, steep slopes, or floodplains, for your consideration, I proposed the text here, which is in item 2 here. And this is what's called a proportionality requirement. Essentially, what it does is require that the configuration of the open space has to be similar to the configuration of the parcel. At that point in time, people can give the commission more open space, but at least the minimum amount of open space being required here, 40% or 50%, can't be more environmentally constrained than the parcel as a whole. It's got to reflect the composition of the parcel. And so I think that other communities do this and have done this for some years. And so I think this could be a way for the commission to address the issue about the type of land being preserved as open space. I did provide in number 3 here, by special permit, the commission could consider the reduction of the open space set aside requirement or the proportionality factor if the applicant made some cogent or compelling reason why. That, they would preserve something or do something in such a way to provide additional amenities or benefits to the community. And one of those could be the provision of affordable housing units. That if somebody's going to go ahead, either in the village district or in the rural district, and provide affordable units, then maybe the commission might back off on the open space a little bit and go to 35 or 45% or something else like that to get affordable housing that might not otherwise happen. So I think this is a key issue we're certainly going to want to return to later. I know Alice felt strongly about it. She's not here this evening, so we're going to have this conversation and talk about this. I think it's also important to talk about determining the maximum number of lots in a conservation development. In the RU1 district, that we use the soil-based approach. We take the soil-based density factors, we add them all up, et cetera. Say, look, that's the maximum number of lots you're going to get on the parcel, lay them out well. And the VR district really doesn't work the same way. It works on the basis of minimum lot sizes. And so we've added this provision here in the VR district that the maximum number of lots is the lower of the following. And it's based on the gross area of the parcel or the net area of the parcel, and based on the different lot size factors. And so somebody would go through the math and say, okay, I think I could get, this number of lots one way and this number of lots the other way. And this regulation says the lower of those two calculations is how many lots you get. So I think, again, this is meant to be a way to not have people generate more lots than they might otherwise be entitled to, but have it be based on the characteristics of the zoning district that they are in. The next page is the development standards in terms of minimum lot sizes, minimum squares, setbacks. You may recall, I think it might have been Mr. Spelbos who submitted a comment, or it might have been Connie too, the concept of a minimum setback around the perimeter of a development. And this might particularly apply in the VR district, that rather than having a side yard setback of 10 feet, perhaps we would set back around the perimeter of the site a distance which would provide some buffering. And then the units within the development could have the smaller side yard setbacks, et cetera. And then lastly, I just got the comment back from Denise. You may recall that the VR district had a provision that referred to the AASHTO guidelines for geometric design of low volume local roads. I asked Denise and Rick, is that a good standard for us? And the language I got back is said, hey, you know what? The roads within the conservation development can be public or private, but they shall be constructed to conform to town specifications and requirements and in accordance with the AASHTO manual at a minimum. And they were comfortable with that language. So we're basically going to get good quality roads appropriate for that level of design and that level of traffic volume, et cetera. So that's a kind of an overview of the regulation. It's a new concept for the commission. The current regulations essentially have 4 sections related to conservation development. Again, RU1 and the conservation overlay, and then the VR, which refers you to another section of the regulations. I think this is going to pull everything into one cohesive whole, and they're going to be treated similarly, with the exception that the way that the development number of units is determined is going to be based on the lot size approach in the VR district and the soil-based approach in the RU1 district. So Matt, with that, I'll turn it back to you and look forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks, Glenn. So I think that it probably makes sense to have a discussion about this, but not come to any conclusions just because we don't have the full commission here. This is one of those. I mean, they're all the entirety of the regulation is important, but this is one where there's been enough debate back and forth with the members of the commission that I think it's reasonable to have a discussion and talk about what the members in attendance tonight think, but that we should anticipate allowing Alice and Wes and Adam and Daryl to weigh in.
Well, then what I might suggest, Matt, is that if it's acceptable to the commission, is rather than have people repeating themselves when everybody else gets back together again, maybe what we do is just table this, carry it through to next month. We're going to be getting together in July. We got a public hearing on the other aspects of the regulation. depending on how that meeting looks, if there's a space or time on that agenda, we could talk about this then, a month from now.
That sounds reasonable to me. You know, I spent some time and I know how I feel about it. And in general, I think that this is a good middle of the road approach between the different positions of the members of the commission. So I think this strikes a really nice balance. So I think I'll stop there, and I think your idea is good, Glenn. The question that I have is, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit more with the full commission. We're making changes to the conservation development ideas in our regulations at the same time as we are really preliminarily starting to look at our subdivision regulations. And it seems to me that, you know, the conservation subdivision in the rural zone was an incentive. There's an incentive there to get more density to allow for open space. And the more density seemed to equate to me to more units on a particular parcel than maybe would be allowed in a conventional subdivision. In the rural zone, I'm sorry, in the residential zone, there really seems to be no incentive to go to a conservation subdivision in the village center, based on the way it's written now. And I guess my question is, should we be developing this conservation development regulation in concert with the subdivision regulations? Or is it okay that this comes beforehand?
So I think the current subdivision regulations do have a provision related to, and Ty, I don't know if you remember off the top of your head specifically what it's called. Is it cluster development or cluster subdivision? What is it? Oh, you know what?
Say, I've got it right here.
Hang on a second. Section 5 of the subdivision regulations is called conservation development. So I think subdivision regulations and zoning regulations really perform two separate but sort of coordinated or integrated approaches to land development. The zoning regulations deal with lot sizes, dimensional standards, and other situations such as that. The subdivision regulations and really the responsibility of the commission in a subdivision approval process is pretty much consumer protection. So let me explain what I mean by that. When the commission approves a subdivision, you are documenting to the world that these lots have been reviewed. They are capable of supporting a well and a septic system. They're accessible to a road either that exists today or is bonded to be built in the future. So if somebody was to buy a lot based on, you know, somebody's real estate ad or whatever, the fact that it's on an approved map, approved by the commission, filed on the land records, is a good housekeeping seal of approval. This lot is buildable and you can buy with confidence. And that's why the subdivision regulations contain standards in there about wells and septic systems and fire protection and water supply, roadway construction and other things like that, open space set aside and bonding. So the zoning regulations, which we're talking about here, is actually the situation that would dictate the number of lots, the side yard setbacks and other things that relate to that. So they're coordinated in that way. Now, some municipalities, as you're probably aware, have separate planning commissions and zoning commissions, not integrated like Kent does. And in some communities, the planning commission wanted to do this. So the legislature wrote the rules on conservation subdivisions that says, look, you guys can put it in either place. I think as maybe a little bit of a regulatory purist, I'm a believer that zoning is the right place to do this. and subdivision should have the standards in for what the road gets built to, how the other issues get documented. And I think at that point in time, everybody stays in their lane. The zoning regulations dictate the density and design of the development. The subdivision is the good housekeeping seal of approval that these lots are buildable, et cetera, buy with confidence. And I think at the end of the day, the statutes require that any subdivision be in accordance with the zoning regulations. So we're going to complete the circle and get it done. So my sense, Matt, is that conservation subdivision approach will not be in the new regulations. So if the commission eventually moves to adopt this, we can establish an effective date of October or some other time when we might then be done with the, or we can even hold this. And then march this through the approval process at the time the commission's adopting the subdivision regulations. But there's no real conflict that way.
Okay. That's great. I can understand that. Shelby, do you have any comments or thoughts on that with regard to what we should be talking about tonight, or Glenn's comments?
No, I think what you and Glenn said makes eminent sense to me. So it seems like the best way forward.
Chris or Karen?
I agree. I think we're heading up the right path here with it. And I liked Glenn's explanation of the good housekeeping of approval for subdivision lots.
I think that adding the other commissioners definitely would be helpful on this. They have more, for more insight, definitely from Adam and Alice and Wes and Daryl. There are a couple of things that I'm a little concerned with on this, so we should definitely, take some more time with it. But I want to read it over a little bit more. I haven't had a chance to read over the whole thing, so.
Good.
Okay, that's great. And Anthony, any thoughts or?
Well, I agree. This is a pretty dense provision. So I think there's a lot to consider here, and everyone's input will be helpful.
Okay, then I don't think that we need a motion to table this. But I think that the consensus is that we'll just talk about this the next time we get together. Glenn?
Yeah, Matt, I just wanted to kind of touch on one thing. You had made the comment earlier that this could be considered to be a denser approach to development. And I think the purpose of this regulation, I think the way I've tried to craft this, Matt, is that, for example, in the RU1 district on a parcel of land, based on the soil types on the parcel, that dictates the maximum number of lots that you can get. In the new regulation, this conservation development approach takes that number and now just allows the units to be located closer together. So it's not actually denser on the parcel of a whole, but the actual building lots are clustered in the parcel to create more open space. So I think we end up with what I would consider to be a development neutral approach from both of these, that it's an alternative development pattern for roughly the same number of houses. There are some towns around the state that do give a density bonus for this. But from my work with developers over the years, what I've learned is that they like the conservation or the cluster approach because they can save tremendously on infrastructure costs, the cost of constructing roads, et cetera. They don't have to build a longer road to provide frontage to all of the lots. And so as a result, the drainage is less expensive. The open space is sort of better laid out, fewer brook crossings or road crossings or wetland impacts. So there's a lot of ways that there are incentives for this, but it doesn't necessarily mean more housing units. It just means that the configuration is different. So I just think I would want people in Kent to understand this is not more density. It's clustering of the same number of units on a parcel to preserve more open space. And so that's the trade-off.
And that's definitely the way I read this, the VR1 and VR2. You know, I think you're right with the rural zone. But you're absolutely right, in the village residential VR1 and VR2. That's exactly what the regulation as written does, which I think is that compromise that I was talking about earlier, which is different than the way it currently is.
Yep, good.
So hold on, let me get back to our agenda, right? So any more discussion regarding the conservation subdivision, and which we're going to talk about that next time we get together in, you know, the third Thursday or whatever it is in August, in July, in September. What month is it?
So just for some clarity, so on the 13th is your regular meeting, and also the public hearings on the few regulations that you have put forward to public hearing. And the 20th is your regularly scheduled special meeting with Glenn. Did you want just the conservation development on that agenda? Do you want also the subdivision on that agenda to start talking about that? Or do you want to take a summer break because everybody's getting burnt out? I'm not sure. As a reminder, also the moratorium is on the July 13th agenda for the subdivision, 6 months. So however you want to, just let me know how you want to schedule things.
So just to be sure that I'm clear, right, Ty, we've got the moratorium on the regular meeting in July, and we've got the public hearing for the regulation changes that we agreed to a month ago from this one coming up in that regular meeting in July, right?
That's correct.
Okay, great.
And then the 20th is your optional special meeting.
Right,
Of July.
That's right.
of July. So if we go back to the you know, to the updated schedule that we, it's sort of the running list of things that we want to talk about. We could. Come on, yeah, so we could add the subdivision regulation, which I think we're going to need to, I think that's the thing that we need to talk about. And if we said to each other that we were going to just do the subdivision regulation over the next several months, finish up the conservation subdivision or conservation development, and then worked on the subdivision regulations, I think that would be enough over the next couple of months. But Ty brings up a question about whether we should be taking a little break for the summer. How does everybody feel about that?
Oh, I like that idea.
I kind of like the idea too, or my suggestion would be to space the meetings out a little further. I find 2 meetings 2 weeks in a row gets to be, you know, a lot. To just to go through, read and understand, blah, blah, blah. I said to myself today, I wish there wasn't a meeting tonight. You know, we just had one last week. So if we could space them out, I don't mind continuing or take a break.
So go ahead,
I
Chris.
do have I have a family vacation in the beginning of August, so.
And that's the other thing that goes on now, you know, with everything, July and August at least. People are on vacation, and these are sensitive regulation changes. We need to have as many commissioners here as possible, I think.
I mean, that's where Adam is right now.
So right now, the only thing that we've got going for the third week in July is this regulation, as Ty was trying to tell us just a minute ago, right? So we've got the conservation development, and then maybe adding something in to talk about. It seems to me that we could push this conversation off until the third Thursday in September and pick that up along with the subdivision regulations, but I don't want to lose momentum on the conservation development. But I understand if we don't take July off, then it's really just going to be 1 month in August that we take off for the second meeting, and I'm not sure that's enough of a break. Glenn, do you, as our consultant, as somebody who we're paying for your time, how do you feel about taking a month or two off from this process?
I mean, I try to adapt my schedule to what the commission's capacity is for this type of stuff to serve you as best I can. I mean, I think I'm not quite sure what your meeting looks like on July 13th, but you know, that we could try to get conservation development in at the end of that meeting. I mean, I could make it a long meeting depending on what else you got going. But then at that point in time, we could table the regulation for accessory dwelling units and everything else. We talked about a public hearing in August there. And I guess that's a regularly scheduled commission meeting. So I'll do what you want. I think, Matt, we've spent more time on the regulation updates than any of us thought. So we've talked about some supplemental funding that might become available, et cetera. So I want to serve you as best I can. And if the commission members want to take time, I'm fine with that. We're not going to skip a beat here when we're ready to go.
Okay, so that's it. So the second point, Glenn, I think that's important that you have been spending more time with us than originally intended, and Ty and I spoke about that, and I think it's perfectly reasonable that with some open communication between you and the land use office, that you get made whole within the parameters of what Ty and Donna think, right? So I think that's that's something good to say out loud. And then in terms of taking maybe July and August off for the second or the third Thursday meeting, let's have a quick discussion about that with the entire commission at our regular meeting in July and make a final decision then.
Sure.
And you know, Glenn, I'm not sure that we are. I mean, if we had a meeting like we had last month, we'll have plenty of time to talk about the conservation development at the regular meeting. But I'm not sure we should count on that. So I'm not sure.
I agree. So Matt, I've got the dates reserved, so I'm booked up, and then I'll work with Ty to figure out what works best for you. And if the commission, I would say put the conservation subdivision on the agenda for the July, what we say 13th meeting, with the notation, something like time permitting. I'm going to be there anyway. So if the commission is up for it, we'll go. And if the commission says, you know what, table to September, I'm good too. So
Okay.
See you on July 13th, and we'll go from there.
That's great. Thanks for being flexible, Glenn. And that's everybody on the commission thinks that that's a reasonable path forward. Okay. Yeah, definitely don't want you all to get burnt out, because that doesn't help either. Us all to get burnt out. Okay, so then that gets us, I think, to the end of the agenda. I think we've spoken about everything we need to talk about, and some extra business in terms of how we're going to move forward. Anybody have anything to say before I maybe look for a motion to adjourn? Then I would look for that motion.
Or we can stick around.
I will happily make an motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Thanks everybody for thanks for your time. I think it was a great meeting. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Take
Thanks,
care.
guys.
Guys.
Good night.